Alright, what's up, y'all? Welcome back. Now, this was told to me to watch in my other rugby reaction that's on the channel. I just did. Now, before we get into the video, shout out to Underdog Fantasy for the sponsor. If you use code MyKill, you get 100% of your deposit matched up to $100, as long as you put in at least 10. More about them later. I was told to watch this because I surely didn't understand anything. The video was lit. I didn't understand nothing that was going on, though. I ain't gonna lie. But let's get into it.
Rugby explained for American football fans.
I'm an American football fan.
To get things started, I want you to picture one of those wild plays at the end of some football games when there's no time left on the clock.
Oh, snap.
The team with the ball needs to score a touchdown. So it's basically a mad scramble with a bunch of laterals.
The Miami Miracle?
With the hope that by doing this, they will eventually be able to break through the defense and score. You're watching some now, so it shouldn't be too hard to picture this. Now, imagine a game where every play is like this. So in our
That's rugby?
game, every play is this type of...
So every play is the final play of the game where you need a touchdown to win.
There are no forward passes. And in fact, a player on offense is...
Huh? I thought we seen... Oh, we didn't see no forward pass. We seen a forward kick.
not even allowed to fumble the ball forward or knock it forward accidentally. In this game that we're imagining, play doesn't stop when a player is tackled. The player just gets the ball to a teammate and the scramble continues. In this game, in order to score a touchdown, you actually have to touch the ball down on the ground in the end zone.
Oh,
and
what?
finally, imagine that no one in this game is wearing...
That don't make sense. Why do I have to touch the ball down? If I'm already in the... So it's actually a real touchdown.
helmets or pads or anything like that. If you can visualize what this imaginary game might be like, you are well on your way to understanding rugby. In fact, rugby and American football more or less descend from the same game, which explains their many similarities. We'll get to the history of
Yeah, it does seem like
all
it's a
of this
lot.
later
It's
in
the
the
same.
video.
Quick disclaimer.
Before we go any further, I just want to say one thing. The purpose of this video is to explain rugby for an American football fan. As was the case with my Cricket Explained for Baseball Fans video, which I
don't even watch baseball.
This video is intended as a basic starting point, and it comes from my perspective as an American-born sports fan.
Okay.
This being said, if you think I've left something out that's critical for a person to know if they want to understand rugby, or if you think that something needs to be better clarified, or if you think I've made an error, feel free to leave a comment. The comment sections under my videos have been overwhelmingly positive and helpful, and I ask that you keep it that way.
The 2 codes of rugby.
Now, if you want to understand rugby, the first thing to know is that there are actually 2 distinct versions or codes of rugby. And these games are different enough from one another that they are usually considered to be 2 distinct sports.
So if it's 2 different versions, what?
The older and more widely played version or code of rugby is officially called rugby union. And rugby union will be blue for the purposes of this video.
Okay.
Slightly, but only slightly, newer code.
Rugby union is the
rugby
older one.
league officially.
Rugby
And
league
the
is...
dominant version of rugby in Australia, especially on the East Coast.
Okay,
in
so it's
Northern
definitely
England,
played.
And in certain Pacific Island nations, including Papua New Guinea, where it's the national sport. Rugby league will be yellow.
It says more similar to American football. So before I became a reaction channel, I used to watch a bunch of... What used to blow up would be Australians watching NFL players. Is that why they would watch NFL players? Because it's so close to the rugby, they were watching Australia? Because I remember like one of the first reactions I ever watched was like an Australian watching my favorite player play American football, Julio Jones. He had a W reaction. You probably can still find it. Probably like, I think it was like 200,000 views or something like that. It's a crazy reaction. But is this why you see a bunch of Australians like to watch American football? It's because their rugby is close to it?
Nations, including Papua New Guinea, where it's the national sport. Rugby league will be yellow for this video.
Okay.
Each of these games generally goes by the simple name rugby when it's being played, and sometimes they use the even more generic term football. So it's important to know which version of rugby you're watching, because again, they are different enough from one another that they are essentially different.
How can you tell?
Now, in the United
Like,
States,
how can you tell
the
what you're watching is different?
predominant form of rugby is rugby
league.
union. And this is
Huh?
a game that most people...
What the fuck? Hold up, wait a second. That makes no sense. I'm sorry for cussing. That makes no sense. If rugby league is more similar to American football, why would you not use... Okay. The U.S. just does opposite of anything that makes sense.
Are referring to when they just say rugby. And again, this is also the case internationally for the most part. Rugby league is much less common in the United States. In fact, Wikipedia says that there are only about 700 registered players in the U.S. However, international rugby league matches are shown regularly in the U.S. by at least one cable network, Fox Soccer Plus. So for some people in the
Yeah. because it's close to American football.
United States, rugby league might be the only version of rugby
They know.
that they have available to them on television.
That makes no sense.
And because I know this channel has an international following, and also because like you might go to Australia and want to watch rugby and need to know what's going on, we're going to be covering both versions of rugby in this video.
I bet.
Get to what makes each version of rugby unique later in the video.
She didn't even touch the ball down.
General overview
Oh, okay,
that
there it
applies to
goes.
both games.
General overview.
Rugby,
She was
in
taunting.
general, is a contact sport played without pads or helmets, contested between two teams of either 13 or 15
So Union used
players,
15,
depending on the version
13,
of rugby.
15
There are
players. Crazy.
7-a-side and 9-a-side versions of rugby. These are shorter and faster-paced versions of the game that are often played at festivals. Rugby is played on a field that is 100 meters long and at least 68 meters wide. So that's
109 yards. So it's shorter than an actual football field. Actual football field is 120, 55 wide.
long and at least 74 yards wide. The field has markings at various points, and lines are called the try lines. At each end of the field is an in-goal area, which is what we would call the end zone. The in-goal areas have a set of uprights that are called goals, and the out-of-bounds area is called touch. So where we would say the ball went out of bounds,
they would say touch, out of bounds.
Into touch, or
it went into
touch.
It's
a
in
rugby
touch,
match
okay.
begins similarly to an American football game. There is a coin toss to determine who kicks off, and the team that receives the kickoff attempts to move the ball down the field to score, while the team that kicked off tries to stop them. The team with possession...
I will put up generational numbers in this sport. You understand that, right? Like, as a person that actually played, I would put up generational numbers. I mean generational numbers in this sport.
Ball is allowed to
like play football, I would put up generational numbers.
Kicking it or tossing it.
I see how they juking, fam. I would kill so many ankles. It would be nuts.
Backwards. Forward passes are not allowed, and an offensive team is not even permitted to play a ball that has been knocked or fumbled forward, even if the knock or the
you gotta let it go.
Unintentional. You are allowed to punt the ball forward. The punt
I remember seeing this.
Used to clear the ball out, similar to the purpose of the punt in American football, but the punt is also used offensively.
You can catch it. Yeah, you can catch it. I seen it.
Which makes it the closest thing to the forward pass in American football.
So it's kind of like soccer, football, man. Is that a touchdown?
Are allowed to make contact with and tackle the ball carrier. Once the ball carrier has been brought to the ground,
are there any flags?
The defender is required to release the tackle, and the ball carrier is required to give up the ball, which usually involves getting it to a teammate to continue play. The rules governing exactly what happens after a tackle has been made differ depending on which version of rugby is being played, and this is the biggest
difference in rules governing what happens after certain types of contact after a player has been tackled are the most significant difference between
the two codes of rugby. Okay. So we're going to be looking at this topic of what happens after a tackle.
You see how I had a high reading level.
All right,
see how fast I read that?
Scoring.
The other reactions be, this how they be, the difference in rules governing. Let me stop, because sometimes I'll be reading it. It be the light you can't see.
The video. All right, let's talk about.
If you have that bright light in your face, you can't really read.
Is to score points either by kicking the ball through the uprights, which is called a field goal, or by bringing the ball past the
same as football
line and touching it to the ground, which is called a try and is very similar to a touchdown. Just like the touchdown in American football, a try is worth more than a field goal. And after a team has scored a try, they get a free kick at the goalposts, which is called a conversion. A team can also score points via penalty kicks, which are uncontested kicks at the uprights that happen after penalties.
That field goal is high as I don't know what.
The number of points earned by all of these things differs depending on which version of rugby.
So in the Union is 3, rugby league is 2 for penalty, conversion is 2 for both leagues, field goal or drop or goal. Rugby union is 3. Rugby league is 1. It says like more like football, NFL football. The try is 5, and the rugby league is 4.
Rugby you're watching. After points are scored, the team that got scored on kicks off to the team who just scored. So yeah, they go hard. A rugby player is...
Hold up. The team that got scored on... Wait a second.
Kicks off to the team who just...
Hold up. The team that got scored on...
The team that got scored on kicks off to the team who just scored.
So it's make it take it.
So yeah, they go hard.
So it's make it take it.
Is only allowed to make a play on the ball or influence the game if they are onside. During play, being onside generally means being behind the ball from your perspective. Being offside itself is not a penalty, but it becomes a penalty when an offside player attempts to make a play on the ball or interferes with the game. There are some more specific rules governing offside, including for some set pieces, and those are outside of the scope of this video.
I think I get it.
Let's talk about that ball real quick. The rugby ball is the same length as an American football, but it is a bit wider and has rounded ends.
Kind
This
of
makes
looks
it a lot
comp.
less aerodynamic.
Look like a Nerf
of course,
football.
That doesn't matter because you're not throwing the ball forward in rugby. In rugby, the play rarely stops except for a few specific reasons. These include, number one,
Injury.
if scoring has happened. Number two, if the ball is moved forward by an offensive player by any means
Okay.
except for carrying it or kicking it. Number three, if the ball goes into touch. Number
Do we
four,
stop for
if there's
injuries?
a penalty. And number five, if there's an injury.
Okay.
Otherwise,
Finna
play
say.
pretty much keeps going. So in this sense, it's a much more kinetic game than American football. When play restarts after being stopped, it is generally restarted via something called a set piece. If you play soccer, you're familiar with set pieces. The main set pieces
set
in
piece.
rugby union are the line out, which looks like this and is how play is restarted when the ball goes into touch, and the scrum, which looks like this and is how play is restarted after certain minor infractions or when the ball becomes unplayable but stays in bounds. The scrum
This is the stuff I was saying that looks like a tush push.
intensely physical in rugby.
This is the new, that was the
and there
old
are
tush push.
strict and specific rules governing the scrum. In rugby league, the scrum is the only set piece, so it's how play is restarted anytime it needs to be restarted. But unlike the scrum in rugby union, the rugby league scrum is more of a formation than a physical contest. And the team that is awarded
The
a
tush
scrum
push, man.
almost
Stop
always
telling me.
gets
It's the brotherly love push.
possession of the ball.
The brotherly
Compare these
push.
rugby league scrums to this
The
rugby
Philadelphia
union
push.
scrum. This is another clue as to which version of rugby you're watching. On screen right now are some basic rugby terms and their American football equivalents. This is for you to use as a reference. Take a screenshot if you want. Beyond all this, the details of the game that you watch will depend on
Screenshot,
the
take
version of rugby that you're watching.
I took it with my brain.
Before we get to all that, I want
Earlier, shout out to Underdog Fantasy for the sponsor. Now, Underdog Fantasy will match your first deposit if you use code Michael 100% up to $100. So if you use the big Benjamin Franklin, they'll give you another Benjamin Franklin. I ain't gonna lie. That's two Benjamin Franklins that you can go place on some entrees. So I'm gonna give you some of my entries, however you want to say it. It's different, you know. I got a crazy accent. I don't know why I say entree. It's an entry. But we was talking about rugby and American football, so we got some American football players, and I got some basketball. So the projection for Kyron Williams was lower. I'm going lower. It was 91.5. I'm going lower. Running backs really don't hit 100 yards. They don't even run a ball enough today in American football for them really hit 100 yards. And most people share carries. But he has been going crazy. But I'm going lower. Chris Olave, 11.8 fantasy points. I'm going higher. All he needs is about 6 catches and 60 yards. If he gets a touchdown, we blow this out the water. Easy money. Jeremy Grant, projection at 5 rebounds. I went higher. He's a power forward. He should get 5 rebounds. He's going up against Washington, going up against Kyle Kuzma, Denny Ajvi. Most of y'all probably don't even know who that is. But probably should go higher. He should. If he doesn't, we got sold, baby. Look, Alvin Kamara, we're going to go lower on the receptions. See, look, in American football, you can throw the ball forward. That means they're going to be throwing to him. He has to catch 5 balls. We're going to go lower. He's a running back. Even though it's AK, this year they ain't been using him how they usually use him. We're going to go lower on that projection. Now, then we got the 3 pick. Easy money for Matthew. He has to throw the ball for once and complete a pass. And we got a win right here. That should be green. Then Anthony Edwards, send a video. As my boy is going. He in LA tonight. People be going crazy against LA. We going higher on the projection of 26.5. Jaren Jackson. His projection was 8 rebounds plus assists. All he has to do is get 4 and 4, 5 and 3, 8 rebounds and 0. Who cares? We're going to go higher on that. Shout out to Underdog Fantasy once again for the sponsor. Use code Michael and they will match up to 100%, up to $100. They will match 100% up to $100.
history lesson so you can get a sense of why rugby and American football are as similar as they are.
A bit of history.
The easiest way to start the history portion of this video is by acknowledging that most forms of football played around the world trace their roots back to the football games played in medieval Europe, and medieval England in particular. These games belong to a wider category of game that has been played around the world throughout history, in which 2 groups of people, and it's usually a large number of people, compete with one another to kick, carry, and or toss a ball.
So this is the original pick 'em up, bust 'em up
goal, or across some sort of line or into some sort of goal area, almost always through violence. This type of game was already known by the name football in England by the 1300s, and the
Oh,
word
wow.
football appears to have been in wide use by the 1500s.
I didn't know
Today,
football went that
these
far back.
medieval games are often called mob football to evoke
Mob
the chaos
football.
and anarchy that defined them. And football was often banned by kings and within various jurisdictions due to the
He's finna hit him with the
and football
craziest
was often
backhand of
banned
all
by
time.
kings and within various jurisdictions
It's
due to
over
the
for bro.
destruction and injury that it brought. By the 1800s, this type of game was being played in a more organized way at schools and sporting clubs throughout the English-speaking world, including the United States and Canada. Up until the mid-1800s,
It's probably somebody that played back then that's probably way better than anybody we have today. It has to be at least one, right? At least one. At least one.
each school or club played by its own rules, and these rules could differ greatly. So when schools played against one another, they had to agree on the rules of each individual match. Eventually, standard forms of football developed, and the first one to catch on widely was a version played at the rugby school in England. This is the game that the modern forms of rugby descend from, and it was the version
Rugby
of
as a
football that
school?
directly inspired what we now call football in America. McGill University in Montreal was the first North American school to base
So
their
basically, we're
rules on
watching the first NFL football
rugby
game.
rules, which had been brought to Canada by British soldiers. Harvard University's football team then learned this version of football during a series of matches between the two schools in 1874. Rugby-style football soon spread to other universities, including Princeton, Yale, Tufts, Columbia, and the University of Michigan, and quickly became
the
the
Ivy
most
League.
popular form of football in the United States. In fact, for the first few decades of American football, the terms rugby and football seem to have been used interchangeably. And when we look at the rule books from the time, we see that
They're probably
early
the same.
American football resembled rugby much more closely than what we would identify as American football today. And even though American
Ew.
football has evolved into its own distinct sport, there are still some vestiges of its roots as what you could call a variation on rugby football. For example, we still call this a touchdown, even
Touchdown.
though we are long past the point where a
Where
player
you
has to
touch the ball
actually
down.
touch the ball down on the ground to score as they do in rugby.
Okay, I see you now. I
Knowing
see.
that bit of history helps put everything in
It did. You did a great job with that. Clap him up for that. He did a great job.
The most significant difference between the two codes of rugby.
The biggest
That kinda
difference
explained a
between
lot.
rugby
I ain't
union
gonna lie.
and league.
As you could tell from the general overview, the two codes of rugby share a lot in common, and the majority of their differences are easily explained. And this makes sense because up until 1895, there was only one code of rugby.
Yo, he's finna hit somebody with the craziest right hand.
Sense
Oh,
because up
God.
until 1895,
You see, like-
there was only one code of rugby. The split happened
Fam, they're holding him to get punched.
because up until 1895, there was only one code of rugby.
He looks like bro from Seven Deadly
The
Sins.
split happened because a group of teams in northern England felt that they were being overlooked by the London-based Rugby Football Union, and also because they wanted to get paid. It seems unthinkable.
Oh, they try to get the
today,
cheese.
But the idea of a full-time professional athlete is actually a relatively new thing. And this topic is interesting enough that it probably deserves its own video.
It
So
can't
let me
be
know
though,
in the
because
comments
wasn't they get paid for the Olympics all the way back then, or were they just winning for their
if you would
country?
be interested in that video. Anyway, so in
Yes, we would.
1895, that group of teams in northern England created their own governing organization, which eventually became known as the Rugby Football League.
League,
And the two
okay.
codes of rugby began evolving independently of one another.
In addition, rugby league became popular among the working class in Australia due to the players wanting to get paid, which is not allowed by the Southern Rugby Union at the time. Today, rugby league has a reputation as being the working class version in the game, even though both codes rugby are now fully professional.
Today, the two codes are different enough from one another that they are generally considered to be two distinct sports. We covered most of the differences between rugby
Yeah.
union and rugby league already, but there's one difference that to me is significant enough that I think it deserves its own section of this video, and that is what happens after a ball carrier has been tackled. This fundamental question has a dramatic effect on the strategy, gameplay, and overall flow of the action in rugby. And ultimately, this question defines the distinct personalities of each game. You'll remember from the general overview that a tackled player in rugby is required to give up the ball.
The ball,
and
yes.
The tackling defender is required to release the tackle. This applies to both rugby codes. What happens next is unique to each game. Let's get into it, and we'll start with rugby league because rugby league operates much more like American football after a tackle. In rugby league, which again is the one that's more popular in Australia and has the field similar to American football, Each team can only maintain possession of the ball for 6 tackles. So this is similar to the 4 downs in American football.
Okay, so you got a downs
Because
basically.
they consider the tackle after a punt or a kickoff to be the 0 tackle. I hope that makes
Okay,
sense.
so it's really
Anyway,
5
in
downs.
rugby league, after the ball carrier has been tackled, the
So does
defense
Union not
is required to
have
clear out at least 10
downs?
meters and allow the offense to play the ball uncontested. This is officially called the play the ball. So you can think of rugby league as having a 10-meter neutral zone after each tackle. The exception to this are 2 defenders called the markers, who are allowed to be near the ball, but they're not allowed to interfere. So I guess they're there to keep the offense honest. I don't know. Any defensive player besides the markers who has not retreated 10 meters is considered offside. So they have to get onside before they're allowed to affect the game in any way. In rugby league, there are no first downs. So a rugby league offense has to score before its 6th tackle.
So,
or else it gives up possession.
what I
This means
mean,
that if a team is on its
you are
6th
just
tackle
running.
and is not close to scoring,
You shouldn't hit the
team will
ground, I
usually
ain't gonna lie.
punt the ball away like in American football. The difference, of course, is that the punt is a live ball in any form of rugby. So if a member of the offense catches
it,
they try to
it's a
score
touchdown.
or at least
Oh, he Julio'd him.
as
Is that a
possible
touchdown?
on their final tackle, as opposed to American football where a team fully gives up possession by punting. If a team does not score and gets tackled a 6th time, they become the defense and have to clear out 10 meters so that their opponents can play the ball uncontested.
A turnover on down.
Because I know it will come up in the comments, I will say that there are a few ways that a team can get a fresh set of 6 tackles, and those are outside the scope of this video. All right, now we're going to talk about what happens after
What's the
a
ways?
tackle in rugby union. In rugby union, the ball is always live and it's always able to be contested. So in rugby,
Oh, this is
union,
just
there's no
like free for
concept
all.
of uncontested possession or downs, and there's no limit to the number of times an offense can be tackled while they have possession of the ball.
This is
If the
mayhem.
ball carrier
I wouldn't play
is
this.
Tackled in rugby union,
Fuck
and
that.
the defender is able to get to the ball.
Get me in the
before
league.
Offense. It's a turnover, which is pretty good on the defender. Because of this possibility, there's almost always a teammate of the ball carrier ready to receive the ball after a tackle. And the defense often doesn't try to contest this handover. But it's also common for the defense and the offense to both engage over the ball after a tackle, which creates a situation called...
Yo, they're throwing
The
punches.
ruck is a
Y'all don't see
vocabulary
that?
term and is an official thing in rugby. Once the referee announces a ruck has formed, there are strict rules governing what is allowed to happen to keep things from becoming a violent free-for-all. For example,
It already is.
required to remain on their feet during a ruck, and players can only join the ruck from the back, from their perspective.
Hey,
The most
yo,
significant
hey,
rule,
yo.
maybe, is that players are not allowed to place their hands inside the ruck, which means that players need to use their feet to bring the ball to the back of the ruck, and or players need to physically push
What
the
the
ruck
fuck?
or engage with the bodies of the opposing team so that
This
a
is
player
confusing.
at the back of the ruck or from outside of the ruck can pick up the ball. Rucks are often
You're
resolved
explaining it to me and I'm still
but sometimes
confused.
they get extended, for lack of a better term.
Yeah,
That's all
this
I'm gonna say
I'd rather
about
watch
in
the
this
league.
video. There is a link in the description if you want more information. So that's the biggest
I
difference
may watch
between
that.
rugby league and rugby union, at least to my eye. And it's what gives each of these sports their own
I
personality.
wasn't confused into
The
that
offense
that part. I ain't
guaranteed
gonna
the
lie.
ball after most tackles. The action in rugby league is more predictable and compartmentalized, and it's easy to make.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Union seems like it's
from
just
the
confusing. I ain't gonna
perspective
lie.
of an American football fan. Rugby union is more kinetic and is more of a perpetual scramble because the ball is essentially always live.
Live, yeah, it
even
just seems
after
like a
tackle.
bunch of nothing is going on.
Recommendations and final comments.
All
Okay.
right, so now that you've got the basics of rugby in your mind, I recommend following this video up by watching a couple matches. If you'd like to start out with a rugby,
was gonna say, I wanna go watch a
which
match.
might be the better place to start just because
Facts.
it's more similar to American football. I highly recommend the 2015 grand final between the Brisbane Broncos and the North Queensland Cowboys of Australia's National Rugby
You think
League,
YouTube
which is
can post
basically the
this?
Australian Rugby Super Bowl. It's available for free on YouTube. If you
Oh,
want
I
to
can
follow
watch it.
The rugby union match, since that's the more common version worldwide, and it's generally what people mean by the term rugby outside of the
Yeah, I want to watch that first video he recommended.
rugby is specifically popular. I might actually point you towards a recent match, the 2022 Women's Rugby
Is that free
Cup
too?
final between England and New Zealand. Both of the matches that I'm recommending are electric and highly
Oh, is the
competitive
second
and
one
very
free?
fun to watch. So they are fun
It's a second one free.
regardless of how
It's a second one free.
rugby knowledge you are bringing into it.
She
I
looks so
promise you that
happy.
by the end of it, you'll
The taunt is
get a
crazy.
sense of this game. If you have further questions, feel free to leave comments. If this is
Thank you, bro. You did really good. You did really good. I have a better understanding, but still not all the way understanding. Let me know if that helped y'all. Fans Guide to American Football Defense. If y'all don't understand that, that's crazy. Let me know if y'all enjoyed the video. Did y'all understand? Do y'all have a better understanding of rugby? I feel like I do. Just a little bit. Let me know what y'all think, though. Shout out to Underdog. Shout out to Underdog Fantasy once again for the sponsor. Maybe we can put entries on rugby. I don't know if they have rugby on there. I have to check. Let me know what y'all think down below, man. I love y'all, boys. I am out.